owner of CRA Counseling Consulting Agency, a private practice in Ellicott City, Maryland. I'm duly licensed in Maryland and DC. And I'm also the owner of Color Trauma and Healing, which is a restorative yoga and a Nidra yoga practice and a mobile practice for yoga. So that's all my stuff. If you're interested in my services, you can reach me at CandaceRDickens.com. Now let's get right to it. I watched Wicked Part 2, and I love Part 1, but Part 2 blew my mind. Because one of the things that occurred to me is that many times people need a villain of a story, right? No one wants to be the villain. People want to be seen as good and kind and ambitious and studious and a hard worker and trustworthy, right? And smart and consistent. But what happens when everyone can't agree upon who you are or the narrative about you? This came up for me when I was watching an interview with Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son. And when I was watching this interview that was on Black TV, one of the things I said as I sat down was, oh, that's Joe Biden's son, the one that used to get in all that trouble, who did the video. And then as I watched it, right, and they were showing the headlines about Hunter Biden, about the drug scandals and the X-rated video, the personal video that he had made privately that someone stole from his computer. I started realizing that there was a narrative that was created, right? Because they need to find a villain in President Joe Biden's life. So who would they find? Well, in this society, if I want to find a villain, I'll find a subjugated group that I will look at. And historically, subjugated groups are usually groups of color or groups that have usually are heterosexual, or they're usually people who are impoverished, or they historically have been people who have addictions, right? So we have a privileged group, right, which oftentimes is a group that is who identifies as white or white European, white American, and then we have a subjugated group. And the subjugated group doesn't have as much power, as much influence. Now, you could be privileged, like you could be Hunter Biden. You got privilege. Why? Because your daddy was the vice president and then became the president. So you have privilege. Now, you've got white privilege as well. What does that mean? You're white male. So you got privilege, right? You can do things that many people of color can't do. You've got power to make decisions. You have doors that open up for you automatically, right? However, once you have addiction, it lowers that privilege, and now you're in a subjugated group where people pick on you, people blame you, people shame you the way people do when people hear that people have addictions. Like look at Billie Holiday, right? Beautiful voice, an icon. But the way she died was being tied to a bed through handcuffs. Both feet were handcuffed, arms were handcuffed. Not because she had a beautiful voice, not because she was iconic or legendary or changed the face of jazz. She was tied down and aggressively pursued by the CIA and FBI because of her addiction. And oftentimes, once people hear there's an addiction, there's shame. It lowers them from this status to this status, right? So you could be Hunter Biden and have privilege because of who your father is, because educationally you went to an Ivy League, by trade you're a lawyer, and you're male, right? But once there's a chink in your armor, a flaw, a deficit seen by society, now you've lost your privilege, and now the story can be created. And those stories that lower us down are shame stories. What are shame stories? Shame stories are stories that are told about you being a bad person. There's something wrong with you. When President Obama was running from office, one of the things I remember hearing um, John McCain say is, I don't know about him. And people were like, what do you mean? There was nothing really to say about Obama. He came up from humble beginnings, right? But the shame was on his pedigree of where he went to school at. He's an elitist. People didn't care that he came from a poor family, and he probably got a scholarship to go to the school because he couldn't afford to pay for it out of pocket, and his family couldn't afford to pay for it out of pocket. But because he went to a school that's identified as being wealthy, right? Even though you may have gotten a scholarship, he may have had a work study student where he worked to go to school. People identified him as elitist, and that title was the privileged title, became shame and lowered him down, right? And made him othered. And for many of us, we don't have the status of an Obama. But the moment we do something, or the moment people make an opinion about us, right? We wear the green face of wicked. People only see what's wrong with us, what's different about us. If you're a certain gender, if you're a female, if you identify as a certain kind of way, right? If you're anything other than heterosexual, sometimes we put a narrative about you, right? If you have a history in your past of committing a crime, and even if you committed that as a child, that narrative continues with you, becomes a shame narrative. If you're a public figure who has an affair, who gets caught, like I'm thinking about someone now that's in the news, a narrative is created. People forget about all the credentials, all the great things that you do. Here comes a narrative. And sometimes, like the movie Wicked, the narrative outlives the person. No matter what the person does to show that they're a good person, that they are outstanding, that it wasn't them like Jonathan Majors, right? Who got accused of violating this woman who was actually the aggressor for him. No matter what this man did or continues doing, there's a narrative, right? Like the football player, Komanek. I'm saying this wrong name, saying incorrectly. So please help me if you know his name, put it in the chat. But he was the one that first took the knee, who talked about the injustice in the world, not just in the NFL, but in the world, the racial injustice, the social injustice, right? And then after people shamed him, he went from being a male, which has privilege, to being a wealthy male, privilege, an athlete, privilege. But also he was a person of color. He was a biracial male. And because of that, this privilege was here, but he was also subjugated. And the moment he did something that was seen as against society, the narrative got created that he wasn't American, that he wasn't a team player, that he wasn't respectful, he was being hostile, right? And whenever you lower someone's worth, you also lower their value in society. So the no team has ever picked up this man. However, after him, it became popular to take a knee. You saw owners of teams taking a knee. But because he did that one thing, right, the narrative was so big that no one would pick him up. Because once a narrative is created about you, many times people will not touch you. They'll see you as a red flag. And there's nothing you can do. That's the most painful thing, where there's nothing you can do to show that that's not who you are. So the movie Wicked, the main character, the green witch, people assumed that she was bad because she was different. And people don't always value difference, right? Unless it has a value or it has a purpose or it has a benefit for them. But because she was different and people didn't, but she was powerful, people fear people who are different and powerful because then that they fear the power. So what do people do when you're powerful and different, right? And not valued in society? What people do is that there's a campaign against you. It becomes psychological warfare. You get isolated, which happened in the movie. She was isolated. You get thrust out, right? People may like what you create for them. People might like how you make them feel, but they still don't quite value you. So it's very similar to what Lena Horne talked about no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. What Ryan Clark recently talked about, the former ESPN sport analyst, said, no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. And all I wanted to do was belong. All I wanted is to feel like I was accepted. He said, so I quieted myself. I changed myself. And no matter how quiet and how meek, how easygoing I became, I never was accepted. I just wanted them to see that I had value, not just as a player, but as an analyst, as a historian, as a commentator, right? He said, I overextended myself. I did a lot of shows. And he said, no matter what, and this man was weeping, he said it was never enough. Because a narrative was created by him as an angry man, an aggressive man, a man who was racist or biased. And what he said is, I wasn't any of that. I was just expressing how I felt. But here's the thing, once a narrative gets created, it takes on energy. It becomes like a folklore, right? It's something like that folklore of, like stereotypes. That even if you say, I don't believe that stereotype's not true. All people of this group aren't great dancers. All people of this group aren't super smart. All people of this group aren't racist. People who wear this kind of hat doesn't mean they're racist. They're just wearing a hat because they support a politician. And people who support this person doesn't mean that they don't like other people. Just because I might be against one thing doesn't mean I'm against all things. But what happens is the folklore and the stereotype continues. And that gets passed down generationally, right? Like there's a belief that children don't know race or racism until around 7 or 8. They don't really get it, right? That's why kids hold hands. You go with those Instagram videos where kids are running and hugging. You go, I love my best friend. But about 6 or 7, kids learn race, they learn color, and learn the value of this color. And they learn things about safety and unsafety and privilege. They learn that by whoever's raising them or in the messages they get received. Prior to that, all they know is love. They know I want to play with someone, I want to connect with someone. Because kids were toddlers, and toddlers were infants, and infants were in the womb. And in the womb, there was connection. All kids want to do is play and connect. But once you see a difference, and once you see someone that's less than, it's about disconnection. It's about the person being treated like they're not enough, and then it goes into their psyche that they're not enough. And whenever you think you're not enough, it lowers your own personal internal value, right? So if you've ever had that experience, I know I've had that experience where once you made up their mind about me, even though I was super nice, worked extremely hard, try to explain myself. Once the narrative is created, it feels overwhelming, right? And for many people who care about their image, who care about the ideal self-image, right? Who say, that's not how I see myself. We'll do self-correction. We'll change ourselves. We'll fix ourselves. We'll try to change something about us. And not realizing it may not be you, boo. It might be the narrative. Because everyone wants, like the woman said in the movie, people want something to not like and people want something to believe in. She said, Glinda the Good Witch, she said, people want to believe in you. He said, so they can't hear me, they can't see me. Because people want a villain. And if you look at all the story tales, all the fables, all the, movies, cartoons we grew up in, there's always a villain in the story. But what if there is no villain? What if there's no right or wrong? There's just consequences for behaviors. What if we learn how to judge people and minimize them and stereotype them to really one-dimensional roles? What if instead of judging, we had compassion? And what if we address self-esteem issues by looking at what is the narrative that you were heard, that you were told? For people who've never been told that they're attractive, they think I'm not attractive. For people who've never heard they're smart, like people don't know they're smart until someone tells them. You just think I'm just doing me. People will give you feedback about who you are. And sometimes we believe the feedback, like it's dogma, like it's God spoken or Allah spoken or Jehovah spoken. But the truth is, it's just a human being giving their impression of you. And their impression may not be the correct impression. It's based on their stuff and not you. So if you're someone who is stuck behind a narrative, one of the things I want you to write down is, who do you think you are? Challenging what everyone else says. And do you have evidence that that's who you are? And there's any little bit of truth in that, because their impression of you is not objective, is subjective. It's based on their history, their experience of you. It doesn't mean it's a correct experience, right? But is there anything you can learn about it? Right? For people who do a lot of work, over please people, over try to convince people, we say, wow, you're exhausted. You're doing more work than the people who you're trying to please. So what if you just focused on you and you really corrected your behavior by saying, you are enough. You are not the green witch. You do not have to prove yourself. You don't have to fit into the stereotype. You don't have to play small because someone thinks you're small. You can be you. And you're amazing as you are. There's only one you. You look like other people, but there is only one you. So I want you to honor that and really give yourself some compassion. You are not alone. There are a lot of people who have narratives that are about them. So you're in good company. If you're someone who has been hurt by narratives, by stereotypes, by being judged, and been even bullied based upon that, there's always help out there. Contact your local insurance company and see if you can find someone who can help you with some self-esteem, some self-concept, some imaging issues, right? If you've experienced racial trauma because people have been treating you, discriminating you based on race, or you've been discriminated based on gender, or based on religion, or based on your ethnicity or cultural religion or backgrounds, there is help. There's nothing wrong with you. What's wrong with you is you've experienced hate. And hate has been legitimized in rules and language and all the other stuff. You're amazing. Just get some help in recovering your truth and exploring who you really are without all that noise. If you're in the DMV looking for a clinician, I'm always looking for clients. My email address again is my website is CandaceRDickens.com. That's CandaceRDickens.com. I look forward to seeing you soon, and thank you all for tuning in. Bye. Colin Kaepernick. That's the guy's name. I always forget it. Bye.